Welcome to LSCDS Speaks. This is a new initiative by the LSCDS with the goal of enhancing professional growth for students and postdocs. My name is Maria, and I will be your host as we talk about all things in professional development to help you make that next career move. But before we begin, I'd like to thank our sponsors listed on the screen here, without whose help this episode would not be possible. In this episode, we learn about the PreAmp Fellowship Program and discover how students and postdocs can leverage the soft skills they've developed during grad school to pioneer novel technologies outside their field of expertise. So if you've ever been interested in transforming your research into an impactful healthcare venture, this episode will provide an exciting glimpse into the world of company creation at Amplitude, Canada's foremost venture capital firm. Today, we have two guests with us who are leading the PreAmp program. Michael Mee, a current managing director, and Virginie Patel-Lagar, a current venture associate. So stay tuned to learn more about the PreAmp Fellowship Program, their process for company creation, the day-to-day of a fellow, and how you can make your application stand out before the March deadline. Hi, Michael and Virginie. Thank you both for being here today. Michael, it's great to have you here, and we'd like to know more about you and your journey to being the managing director at PreAmp.
Yeah, absolutely. So first off, thanks so much to the LSCDS for coordinating this podcast. It's a great service to the community and getting sort of interesting stories about opportunities after grad school in the life sciences out to your members. So a little bit about myself. As you mentioned, I'm managing director at PreAmp. My background, like many of your listeners, is from a technical sort of side of things. So I did my PhD in biomedical engineering. I did that down in Boston. And I did in a lab that was very entrepreneurial. I got bit by the entrepreneur's bug, I like to say. I launched my own company, and that really set a trajectory for me of thinking about how to be involved in early stage company creation in the life sciences. So I did that also in industry down in Boston for about 5 years, and then moved back to Canada, where I joined the founding team of Amplitude Ventures and participated in the formation of PreAmp, our internal venture studio, that I'm, as we said, managing director at. To try to put in place an approach to thinking about how do we professionalize and approach company creation in a very systematic manner. And part of that was building out the fellowship program that we run on an annual basis at PreAmp. So wear many hats as an entrepreneur, innovator, investor, and sort of diverse experiences leading to that.
That's very exciting. Virginie, what was your introduction to PreAmp like?
Yeah, so I actually did the fellowship in 2021. So I was part of the original cohort of fellows, and I really enjoyed my experience. And following the fellowship, I really wanted to continue working on the project as well as working with Amplitude. So I continued consulting while finishing my PhD, which I did in December. And joined full-time as a venture associate at PreAmp. My PhD, my background a little bit, my PhD is in neuroscience from McGill University, where I focus mostly on the role of mitochondrial dysfunction in ALS and Parkinson's diseases.
That's really interesting. It's great to know that the fellowship made such an impression on you that you wanted to continue. So the reason we're here today is because we wanted to speak with you both about recruiting for the fourth year of the PreAmp Fellowship. So this is a really exciting program, and can you give us, our listeners, a brief overview of what the PreAmp Fellowship is and its mission?
Okay, so I can start knowing that I went through it, and then I actually led it as well for the 2 previous years. The fellowship program is run throughout the summer, so it's 3 months. We recruit PhD students, postdocs, as well as MD PhDs across life sciences, across Canada, and even internationally. And we bring all those individuals together during the summer, where we really focus on novel company creation. So the month is divided in 3 cycles, and during those 3 cycles, each month you kind of go through this process where we give you an area that we think that there's a lot of innovation that happens and that is really interesting, and we think there's a lot of potential. And then in teams, you really plunge into that area and try and see where there could be novel company creation. And at the end of the month, what you do is you pitch it to the PreAmp Amplitude team as well as the advisor. So it's really interesting, super interactive. And I have to say that most of the time you are not in your area of expertise. So for example, my PhD is in neuroscience, and I did not I had one exploration when I was a fellow where it was a little bit more focused on neuroscience. And it was actually a lot more difficult for me to be creative in that process. So it's a really exciting journey and a way to look at science very differently to what we're used to in academia.
I was just going to jump in and sort of maybe add a couple of thoughts as well on sort of why we created the fellowship program at PreAmp and Amplitude as well. Like one of the things that we think a lot about is how to educate and inspire the next generation of entrepreneur within our ecosystem. And we think the fellowship is a great way to do that, where we teach them about sort of the PreAmp company creation process, how to think strategically about developing new technology concepts and sort of articulating those in a very succinct way, concise way to investors to get that feedback. And so there's a lot of sort of experiential learning by working hand in hand with the PreAmp team, with other fellows, and with the broader Amplitude team as well. But we also have more didactic elements as well, where we bring a number of sort of individuals from across our portfolio, our network of advisors and groups that we work with to come and speak to the fellows about elements of their day-to-day as well. So for example, we have like an IP strategy session with a leading IP firm. We have a CTO and CSO panel where there are sort of those executive leaders on the management team from some of our portfolio companies that come and talk to the fellows about their path to sort of how they got to those positions, whether it's through sort of small biotech or pharma. So a lot of opportunities to learn. And then I'd also highlight that we think one of the great advantages of the fellowship program is also the network that you start to build, right? So the people that you're working with within the cohort of fellows for that year, but also across the PreAmp team, the Amplitude team, and the advisors, right? And so with these being sort of the future leaders of this industry, in 5 years from now, they'll be looking around the table in the companies they're working on, and they'll recognize a lot of faces and names from the people they worked with in this fellowship program. So I think that's a really exciting part as well.
Mm-hmm. I think that's something a lot of people realize through their academic journey, the importance of networking and not just the science. So I think that was pretty important to emphasize. You also touched on something that I found interesting. You mentioned, or you suggested that PreAmp's approach to innovation is a little bit different. And I know that PreAmp emphasizes a purpose-built company creation process. Can you touch on this and how it differs from incubators or accelerators in academia and industry?
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess when we think about company creation, there's a couple elements. One, we try to focus our time and energy on sort of the biggest game-changing types of technologies that might require a lot of capital investment to do, but are very big, bold ideas. And we think it's really important to have that boldness of vision and inspire that boldness of vision in entrepreneurs from across the country, because it's these big ideas that ultimately you'll be able to sort of recruit a lot of individuals and grow a really inspired team around. That's really important for pushing companies forward. But also raise the capital required to go and do that, right? And so it starts from that premise of dream big, right? And then from a more tactical approach perspective, we start by sort of asking really broad what if questions, right? So what if this technology could exist? And from there, we try to sort of articulate what that technology should look like in a fairly specific manner, really inventing this, right? Sort of at the fringes of where sort of published literature currently shines a light on our knowledge of biology. And then sort of quickly sort of flip the angle or flip the lens, think about what would be the value, right? Can we articulate very specifically where a technology like this could be applied? Would it be broadly applicable across multiple therapeutic areas and different diseases? And if the answer to that question is no, we never go and figure out how hard it is or all the details of the science. But if the answer is yes, we spend a lot more time fleshing out and sort of thinking about the science. So that's sort of the general approach as well. That's a little bit different. And sort of iterating between what I call sort of solution space, sort of that technology that you're developing, and the problem space, those areas of clinical unmet need, sort of really is a dynamic way of thinking about developing these early stage technologies and company strategies. And then I'd say the third element that is a little bit different is at PreAmp, the view is that we want to be spending our time, which is our most limited resource in life, our time, energy, and capital from Amplitude on the ideas that have the highest scope of impact, highest potential scope of impact, and the greatest feasibility of advancing, right? And actually being able to de-risk and develop those technologies. And therefore, to do that, we actually start by looking at 30 or 40 sort of hypotheses of what ventures could be. We call them venture hypotheses. And we very quickly filter those down based on those axes and sort of lenses of scope of value, potential, and feasibility of developing that technology, so that we end up really focusing our time on those projects that can go the distance. And I think that's a really critical element where we're not just sort of holding one hammer and sort of pushing that as far as we can until it doesn't work anymore, right? We're actually covering a lot of ground and sort of pruning branches of this broad dendritic tree of potential opportunities.
I think a lot of different grad students who get into science have this goal, and they go through their project and they want to be able to make impact, and they don't always see it in their project because like you're put in this very narrow niche. And because of that, I can see this program attracting a lot of diversity in science backgrounds, which I think was previously mentioned. So what is the impact of this diversity in science backgrounds on the program?
So I think that the diversity of backgrounds in the program is really a big benefit, because if you put an immunologist and a protein engineer in the same problem, they're going to look at the problem very, very differently, and they're going to come at it in very different manners. We all have our biases, and we all have different things that we're excited about. So it's really interesting to get paired up with somebody that does something that's completely different than you, especially for the creative part, because to be creative, you have to think outside the box. So oftentimes we're going to make sure that people don't go into their areas of expertise, because that way it's a lot easier to not have those barriers when we think about the science, and to really push the creativity and do those what if big statement that Mike said. And then if those statements have value, and if those statements we think that they might have impact, then we go in and look at the feasibility. So I think that having that broad area of expertise around the table is super interesting. But I also think that for me, as when I went through the fellowship, what was interesting is that I realized that my PhD training is not only the neuroscience. You learn a lot of things and a lot of skills that are going to help you in these company creation. You learn problem solving, critical thinking, you learn how to work in teams. So I think it also shows the students and the fellows that participate in the fellowship that they don't necessarily need to only stay in their area of expertise, and it's easy to go around. We learn how to learn in a PhD, I think, and it's really interesting to go through the fellowship, because it really shows you that.
Yeah, and I just add like that sort of learning how to learn is, and like it's almost like kids in a candy shop. Maybe I could describe it as when I see the fellows and diving into new areas of science outside of where they've been training for the last 4 or 5 years for their PhDs or academic training, where I can almost articulate it as like the rush of the exponential learning curve, right? You're diving into a new area, learning about things, thinking about things from a new perspective, and that just leads to a lot of creative thinking, to sort of echo Virginie's point. And then I'd say, like when you think of driving innovation, like having a new lens and a new perspective is really important, right? And so how do we push through boundaries and think about science in different ways to drive that innovation? And part of that is challenging the dogma, right? Like sometimes the reason we do things a certain way in science and given fields is because not for a super logical reason, but because that's the way we've done it for the last 50 years is the answer, right? And so having someone come in from the outside and sort of poke and prod a little bit and challenge some of those assumptions and biases is always pretty interesting.
I think that's a really that's very important to highlight, because in academia, as you go down the academic path, it's always about narrowing your focus and being more and more specific in what you're studying. And this gives people an opportunity to use the same skills, like Virginie, you were mentioning, from your PhD, and explore other sides of science and other topics where maybe you could have more impact because you're bringing a novel lens to the conversation. While I think it sounds really exciting and creative, it also sounds like it can be a very intense program. And I'm sure a lot of people, for that reason, are interested in what a day-to-day of a fellow looks like. So, Virginie, maybe you can walk us through the time commitments and expectations on how fellows contribute to venture creation.
Yeah, so time commitment, the fellowship is full-time, so it's 3 months full-time commitment. However, I have a PhD, Mike has a PhD. A lot of people know what it is to go through a PhD and know that there are some experiments that are required to be kept. So there is some flexibility in the sense that if you have to do some cell culture and continue some experiments, you can do that. But we do expect a full-time commitment for those 3 months. The day-to-day. So day-to-day is pretty simple in the sense that, I don't think we did mention it, but the program is mostly virtual. So it's run through Zoom. We do try and bring fellows together for a short part of it, maybe a couple of days. But most of it, the majority of it is really run on Zoom. Day-to-day, how I really experienced it is a lot of literature shirts at the beginning and obviously thinking creatively about ideas, but a lot of meetings with your teammates. So we're in team and there's a lot of creativity that happens when you meet with your teammates. We also have most of the time, every day, you can meet with a teammate member of either PreAmp or Amplitude, so your team leads. And usually each team is followed by a lead, which is either from the PreAmp or Amplitude team, and an observer and support. So there's 3 people from the core team that are really following the fellows. And at the end of the week, usually on Fridays, the whole team is there. And then you can really get feedback from somebody that hasn't seen the work for a week, which is super interesting. And the summer is also punctuated by those more classical, not classes, but Zoom meetings where you're going to have people coming in and talking about their experiences in company creation or in IP or a lot of different parts of the company creation.
And from the standpoint of like what you're doing over the course of any one of those 1 month cycles as well, Maria, it might be interesting to emphasize, like it's also differs week to week a little bit what the focus is, right? So at the beginning of the month, we like to say you're sort of growing the tree, creating the branches of the tree, right? So starting from the area of science that we've sort of focused on and identified and done that pre-work in advance of the fellowship to sort of focus an exploration around, we work with the fellows to start to identify as many directions that you could potentially develop that science. And I like to say, try to push the fellows to evolve those in a way that makes them as orthogonal as possible, as different as possible, right? Because often we start to get in a rut when we're thinking about a given concept, and we start getting attached to one idea over the others. And we really push to try to develop as many concepts as possible. And then work to sort of in the middle, week 2 to 3, we start pruning those branches, de-emphasizing them based on feedback from the science, et cetera. It's in those middle 2 weeks also that we have a lot of discussions with KOLs or key opinion leaders, academics from around the world that we jump on Zoom calls with, phone calls with advisors from the PreAmp and Amplitude network as well to weigh in on some of those concepts. And then towards the end of the month, there's a lot of focus on, okay, we've covered a lot of ground. How do we make a really concise articulation and presentation around our concepts and those that we believe are strongest? And I think that's really great training for these entrepreneurs, where sometimes how you present to investors is also a little bit different than how you might give an academic presentation. And learning that approach is really interesting as well, and getting feedback on how to sort of articulate a strategy in different directions that a technology can go.
This sounds like a very robust program that helps students or people interested in entrepreneurship grow in multiple different ways, like not just a field of study that they're interested in or industry, but also engaging with a lot of different types of professionals and developing a lot of different skills that you might not get a chance to in grad school. So for our listeners who might be interested in applying, what are the key details about the PreAmp fellowship that they should know?
Well, one, that the call for applications for the 2024 cohort of fellows is open. We're accepting applications on a rolling basis this year, and you can apply by sending an email, a cover letter describing why you're interested in the program, highlighting your strengths as an applicant, as well as a CV or sort of a short resume, highlighting some of those elements of your career that would sort of put you in sort of a prominent lens as well. And you can send that to fellowship@amplitudevc.com. And then I believe the end date for the application cycle is towards the end of March. I'd say, as we already highlighted, there's no field of study other than that we sort of specifically look for, other than touching on the life sciences and healthcare. So this could be people coming from a computational background, people coming from molecular biology, right? Really across the board. But one thing that we really do look for are some of those maybe like softer skills that Virginie highlighted, right? Like team collaborative capabilities and creative sort of nonlinear thinking, creativity, and sort of entrepreneurial spirit and drive as well. And you don't need to have started a company to demonstrate that, right? Like I remember when I first met Virginie, like she was talking about how she was the first PhD student in her PI's lab, and she was describing everything she did to get the lab up and running. I'm like, that is evidence of an entrepreneurial spirit right there, right? Sort of willing to roll up your sleeves, fear of nothing, and just diving in and getting it done. So there's many ways to demonstrate that, and I'd encourage applicants to highlight what sort of experiences in their past sort of highlight those entrepreneurial qualities as well.
I think that's a really important point, because whenever you think about programs like this, especially if it's promoting entrepreneurship, there's this intimidation of, I haven't started a company yet. How am I supposed to contribute? So it's really good to know that you're looking more so for soft skills that can be translatable into entrepreneurial qualities rather than specific hard skills.
Yeah, and I think that it's important that the people understand that we also don't expect them to come in with ideas. We don't expect them to know everything about VC. I didn't know a lot about that side. I think it's, if you're interested, if you've got the drive, if you really want to push the science forward, there's a space for you, and it's not to be intimidated by how it looks. We're really just looking for individual with those soft skills as Mike mentioned.
That makes sense. And I think maybe this is a good time to highlight this, but you mentioned VC. What do you consider the difference between the two different types of VC in this case, venture capital and venture creation?
Well, I'm glad you sort of use that sort of coining of VC in two ways, because I like to highlight that as well. Well, so venture capital and investing is very much that you're in a position of making a decision on someone else's concept, someone else's strategy, and you use a lot of your tools and science to understand what are the risks around the biology, what are the risks around the technology, etc. But ultimately, you're investing behind someone else. Whereas venture creation, you're making that soup, right? Like you're rolling up your sleeves. You're the one sort of coming up with these strategies, coming up with these technologies, to the point where we just filed IP at PreAmp on one of our first companies that we're launching, right? Like we did that innovation internally. And so I think that's really exciting and really stimulating. They're definitely very different. There's an overlap in skill set, right? Like when you think about company creation, you need to know how to raise money. You need to know what investors are interested in. And I think that's one of the beauties of doing a program like this in the context of a venture capital firm, where you get all that feedback from sort of the network of partners, of people on the VC side that really help to sort of refine and evolve the strategy, evolve how we're presenting the concept of the company, making sure that we have no stone left unturned in terms of the types of questions that investors might be asking us down the line, right? So there's a lot of benefit of being able to do this in the context of that environment as well.
Thank you for clarifying that. And I think it really highlights the types of candidates you're looking for as well in this program. And hopefully it helps diversify those interested those who might not think they are qualified to apply. It might help them motivate them to apply.
Certainly hope so.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. So before we wrap things up, I was wondering if there's any interesting anecdotes or stories you'd like to share from previous PreAmp fellowships.
I think like one of the things that gets me most excited about the program and the success of the program is that we now have 3 full-time employees at PreAmp who are sort of in-house scientific entrepreneur company creators, and they've all come through the PreAmp fellowship. So Virginie is one. We have 2 others that are sort of on the team at PreAmp as well. And I think that's sort of an amazing anecdote in my mind of like the type of individual that sort of emerges from that, and also a lot of pride in like the other destinations that some other fellows have landed in following the program, be that in sort of leading scientific positions in companies across the portfolio, in other sort of ecosystem organizations that focus on tech transfer or sort of company creation through a different lens. Some have gone on to be investors or play a role in investment banking. Others are creating companies on their own and sort of are their independent entrepreneurs. So I think those are really exciting elements. What other anecdotes to highlight? Again, like I really enjoy, like we have a number of like social events that we coordinate throughout the summer as well. This past summer's 2023 sort of fellowship, we brought everyone to Montreal for a week. And I thought that was a really nice way to kick off the fellowship. That was the last week of the first month. So towards the end of June, Jazz Fest is going on in Montreal. So everyone is having a great time, working really hard, but like everyone came to the PreAmp offices and we're able to work together. We did all those final presentations in person, but it really provided a really nice opportunity for everyone to meet in person and set the stage for those great relationships throughout the rest of the summer as well.
That's really great to hear because given that everything is primarily online, having those social events to get people together really changes the dynamic of work and also people's ability to connect. So that sounds fantastic.
And it's not a perfect solution for everyone because people come from all over the country, but we have offices in Montreal, Toronto, and Vancouver. And so we definitely encourage fellows, as much as you can do it online over Zoom. We always encourage people, if you want, come on into the offices if you're in one of those cities, and there's going to be a space and a desk for you, and the ability to work sort of in person with members of the Amplitude and PreAmp and other fellows as well.
Awesome. That sounds great. Is there anything else you'd like to leave our listeners with before we end the podcast today?
I just say get excited and apply. Yeah,
I think it's a great opportunity, and I think you should definitely apply to this fellowship. It's a really, really great opportunity.
Okay, thank you both for being here today, and thank you for teaching us so much about venture creation. I hope this really motivated our listeners to apply.
Awesome. Well, really appreciate you sort of putting on this podcast, as I mentioned at the outset. It's been great to chat with you, and it's been a great conversation.
I'd like to thank Michael and Virginie for their time. I hope this conversation has provided you a brief glimpse into the world of company creation and the PreAmp experience. So if you're ready to be on the forefront of healthcare innovation, don't miss your chance to apply for the PreAmp Fellowship before the March 31st deadline. Thank you again for listening to LSCDS Speaks. And until next time, stay curious and keep innovating.